Friends, it's such an honor for me to have been awarded with the Book of the Year award for both preaching about racism and anxious to talk about it, helping white Christians talk faithfully about racism. It was a huge surprise and a great honor. So I want to just say thank you for considering my work for this award. I also wanted to let you know some of the ways that I'm continuing this work and ways that you all and your congregations can continue this work in your own churches and in your own communities. As I mentioned in the book Anxious to Talk About It, I've been part of a group of scholars, mostly from historically black colleges across Texas, and one of our alums from Austin Seminary, Steve Miller, who has headed up an oral history project going to different HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities in Texas, and having students from these schools help collect interviews and stories about persons' experiences with racial discrimination. So just this past weekend, we had our third annual oral history project in San Antonio at St. Philip's College, and we had two students from Austin Seminary joining us. And in this day of listening to stories and hearing stories, again and again, I heard persons of color express their deep gratitude for the opportunity to share their story with these students. And I heard students expressing deep gratitude for being able to hear and receive the gifts of these stories. Now, it wasn't easy. It was exhausting for everyone, for the storytellers, as well as for the students collecting the stories. It takes a physical toll on your body to be listening to stories that can have a deep emotional impact. And so I say that by way of encouraging you all to continue to listen for the stories that are there in your midst. Stories of people who are part of your congregation, part of your community, listening for stories that have to do with race and racism, and deepening your congregation's capacity to hear those stories. Because if we are more comfortable with those emotions, with feeling our own discomfort and feeling the pain that we hear from others, then we are going to become a deeper part of this community, of this broader world that we are just one part of. And by hearing these stories, sitting with these emotions, we receive the gifts of coming to understand one another's reality in a different way. So that's one of the things that we're doing at Austin Seminary, and one of the reasons why I couldn't be with you in person. We just had today a day of memory and hope, the African American experience in Austin Seminary. Sorry, this is probably not very clear to you all, but I'll try to make it clear. We had on our campus several of our firsts. We had our first African American matriculant by the name of Daniel Clark, who started at the seminary in 1950, started coming to campus as a student. And we had our first African American faculty member, Stephen Reed, who is currently at Baylor. He was here for 12 years during the 90s. And we had our first African American secretary, administrative assistant to the seminary. And she shared her experience of having been part of the early integration efforts in Austin, having grown up in Austin and going to an Austin high school as it was being integrated. And so she said, coming into the seminary administration as they were intentionally trying to integrate, that was not a big deal, compared to what she had already been going through. And having had the legacy of her ancestor, I think her grandfather or uncle, had been one of the early African American legislators in Texas. There were 52 black legislators in our Texas state government during Reconstruction, and then after that, not another one from 1900 until 1962 when we have Barbara Jordan. So there's this huge gap in opportunity for African Americans in our state. So I share all of these stories of people who have come to campus by way of, again, encouraging you to reach out into your community, to learn about the firsts that are among you, to learn about the history of your town, learn about the history of your state. What were the laws that governed segregation? How recently have some of those laws against miscegenation or interracial marriages been blocked? All of these kinds of historical markers aren't just things that are interesting tidbits of our past, but impact our ongoing conversations, impact our present, and being able to hear these stories. Now, when I heard the stories that our guest shared with us today, I was really, really blessed because they shared about their own struggles as well as the gifts that being here had given to them. Our fourth panelist at this Day of Memory and Hope this morning was Reverend Sharon Risher. Now, Reverend Risher is one of our alums, but she is made more famous more recently because her mother, Ethel Lance, was one of the 9 victims in the Mother Emanuel Church shooting in Charleston. And she was serving at the time as a trauma chaplain in Dallas, and she has since gone on to become a nationwide public speaker in favor of gun control. And actually, she has a book coming out by Chalice Press this upcoming summer, For Such a Time as This. So I recommend you looking up Sharon Risher's book in the coming months. But hearing her tell her story of coming to Austin Seminary, she had met another one of our alums when she was working in a presbytery office on the East Coast. The alum was by the name of James Lee, who's one of our local Austin heroes, but who unfortunately died pretty recently. And she said that talking with James and then a few other things came together to really invite her into this space, into really calling her to be a minister here at Austin Seminary. So she said, I didn't choose Austin Seminary. Austin chose me. And it made me think also about our role as pastors and community leaders to be the ones that are doing this choosing, that are going out and intentionally seeking out the diverse voices in our communities and in our churches, and making the choosing of lifting up these voices to say, yes, we want to hear from you. We want you to be able to share your gifts with us. Now, it's always a struggle to know how to best incorporate the gifts of others when you're working in churches. One of the critiques that I've heard in the past with churches of color trying to work with white churches is that when churches do like church swaps, for instance, white churches wanting to have the black pastor preach at their pulpit and choir come and have another Sunday where the other choir comes and preaches at the other church. The problem with those kinds of exchanges is that often nobody shows up at the black church. The black choir goes over to the white church, they sing, people show up. But then when the reverse invitation is issued, there's not that same amount of participation. So if you do in your work towards racial justice in your communities want to have these kinds of relationships, I really want you to be in conversation with the people that are in your congregation to make sure this is something that they're all in with, that they're comfortable going to another congregation, that they're comfortable really receiving the gifts that others have to share, because that's really what this work is about, is being open to receive the gifts that others have to offer. And I hope that my work with Anxious to Talk About It can help conversations around That deep gratitude as being the grounding motivator for this work can help you have these conversations with your congregation. And I hope as you plan your sermons, I hope that preaching about racism, a guide for faith leaders, can be a support to you in thinking theologically and thinking about how you read Scripture through the lens of these ongoing realities. And again, how you understand the process of transformation from a psychological perspective of racial identity development. There's a number of different ways that as pastors, you're having to juggle a lot. You're having to keep a lot in your mind when you're preparing these sermons and when you're guiding a congregation through the work of transformation. But now is as good a time as any to get started. So if you haven't gotten started on the work of racial justice, I encourage you to take that step in faith, knowing that God goes with you and that there is a growing movement across our country of people interested in having these conversations, of being open to the hard conversations that these necessitate, and being open also to the gifts of one another. I want to thank you again for the opportunity it has been for me to be able to be with you, albeit virtually. And again, I apologize for not being able to be with you in person, but I want to say hello to my colleague Cindy Rigby, who I understand will be with you. And I wish you all the best. Blessings, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Bye-bye.